My wife locked my 82-year-old father outside in a storm and said, "He's not my problem." She said it while he stood under freezing rain with one slipper missing one hand on his cane, and his heart medication in the pocket of a soaked cardigan. I did not yell that night. By morning, though, I made sure she understood exactly whose problem she had become. My name is Daniel Whitaker. I am 56 years old, a plumbing contractor from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I have spent most of my life fixing things other people let rot behind walls. Bad pipes, cracked drains, hidden leaks. Funny thing is, I missed the one leak inside my own marriage until my father was shivering on my front porch. My father, Arthur Whitaker, is 82. He delivered mail for 37 years, raised 3 sons after my mother died, and never once asked for more than black coffee, clean socks, and a little dignity. He is not a rich man in the flashy way. No sports cars, no country club. But he built his life carefully, brick by honest brick. After his second fall last winter, I moved him into the guest suite behind our kitchen. Not a nursing room, not a burden room. A real room with his old radio, his quilt, his Bible, and the oak dresser my mother bought in 1969. I told him it was temporary until he felt stronger. Privately, I hoped he would never leave. My wife Marlene smiled when I first suggested it. She used the soft voice people use when they want witnesses to remember them kindly. "Of course," she said. "Family takes care of family." That was in front of my brothers, my aunt, and our pastor's wife. Behind closed doors, her kindness began losing teeth. At first, it was small. She said Dad's chair made the living room look crowded. She said his pills on the counter made the kitchen feel like a clinic. She complained that he watched old westerns too loud, though I had bought him wireless headphones. Then she started calling him your father instead of Dad. Language always tells on people first. Marlene's sister Tessa was the real storm cloud behind it. Tessa had divorced a dentist, lost her rental, and decided our guest suite would be perfect for a little reset. Marlene never said directly that Dad should leave so Tessa could move in. She did not have to. She simply began treating my father's presence like furniture blocking a doorway. My father noticed. He pretended not to because old men who have survived enough pain learn how to make themselves small around selfish people. He started eating breakfast earlier. He stopped sitting in the living room after dinner. He folded his newspaper in half so it would not take up space on the table. That broke something quiet in me. I should have acted then. I know that now. But I told myself marriage required patience. I told myself Marlene was adjusting. I told myself Dad was sensitive after losing independence. Men like me can fix a copper line in the dark, but we can stare at emotional rot for months and call it weather. The night everything changed was Friday, November 8th. Rain had been falling since noon, cold and mean, the kind of rain that does not splash so much as bite. I was 40 miles away in Morristown finishing an emergency repair at a funeral home. A basement pipe had burst, and the director was frantic about services the next morning. At 6:18 p.m., Dad called me. I missed it because both my hands were under a sink valve. At 6:22 he called again. At 6:27 my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez called. That one I answered because she never called unless something was wrong. Her voice came through sharp as broken glass. "Daniel, your father is outside." For a second my brain refused the sentence. "Outside where?" I asked. "On your front porch," she said. "In the rain. He's been knocking. I saw him from my kitchen window." "Marlene is home, Daniel. Her car is in the driveway." I stood up so fast I hit my shoulder on the cabinet frame. I called Marlene immediately. She answered on the 4th ring with music and women's laughter behind her. "What?" Not hello. Not "are you okay?" Just "what?" I said. "Why is my father outside in the rain?" Silence came first. Not surprise. Calculation. Then she said very calmly, "Because he walked out there, Daniel." "Open the door," I said. She sighed. I could hear ice clinking in a glass. "He keeps wandering around like a child." I told him if he wanted to act independent, he could figure out how doors work. I remember gripping the phone so hard my knuckles hurt. "Marlene, open the door." "He's not my problem," she said. 6 words. 6 little knives placed neatly into 38 years of my father showing up for me. Then she added, "I have guests. I am not ruining my evening because your father wants attention." The line went dead. For 3 seconds I could not move. Then the man inside me, who still had a father, began moving very fast. I left the funeral home job half finished and called my apprentice to close up. Then I called Mrs. Alvarez back. She was already putting on her raincoat. "I'm getting him," she said. No argument. That woman is 74 with one bad hip and more spine than half the men I know. She got to my porch before I got to my truck. The drive home should have taken 45 minutes. I made it in 31. Rain slapped the windshield so hard the wipers looked tired. Every red light felt personal. Every mile showed me another version of my father outside, younger, carrying me through fever. Middle-aged, fixing my first truck. Old, now locked out of the house I had promised was safe. When I pulled into the driveway, Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen lights were on. My father was not on my porch anymore. Marlene's friends' cars were still parked along the curb. I could see silhouettes moving through my living room, glasses in hand, as if the evening had merely adjusted around a small inconvenience. My father had been moved like a wet umbrella. I went first to Mrs. Alvarez's house. Dad sat at her kitchen table wrapped in 2 towels and a pink floral blanket. His hands trembled around a mug of tea. His hair, usually combed flat with soldierly care, stuck to his forehead. One slipper was gone. His left sock was dark with rainwater. When he saw me, he tried to stand. I crossed the room and put both hands on his shoulders. "Don't," I said. My voice cracked on the word. He looked embarrassed. That is what nearly killed me. Not angry. Not demanding. Embarrassed, as if being left outside in November rain was somehow poor manners on his part. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered. "I think I caused trouble." That sentence changed the temperature in my blood. Mrs. Alvarez touched my arm and said softly, "He was out there at least 20 minutes before I saw him. Maybe longer." She gave me something else too. A small USB drive. My porch camera caught part of it. "I thought you should have it before anyone explains too much." I thanked her, helped Dad into my truck, and drove him to the emergency room. His temperature was low. His blood pressure was unstable. The doctor said the rain and cold could have caused serious complications, especially with his heart condition. Dad kept telling nurses he did not want to be a bother. Every time he said it, I felt another old excuse die inside me. Marlene called at 9:11 p.m. I watched her name glow on my phone while Dad slept under heated blankets. I did not answer. She called again, at 9:19. Then she texted, "You embarrassed me in front of my friends." That was all. Not "How is he?" Not "Is Arthur okay?" My father was in a hospital bed, and she was worried about her audience. At 1003 she left a voicemail. I listened once. Her voice was tight, annoyed, theatrical. She said Dad had made a scene. She said he had stepped outside after she told him not to interfere with her dinner. She said she assumed he had gone to Mrs. Alvarez's himself. Then came the line that told me everything. "You always choose him over our life." Our life. That was what she called it. Not my father's safety. Not a medical emergency. Our life, meaning her comfort, her sister's plans, her friend's opinion, and the version of our marriage where I kept smoothing over her cruelty so nobody had to call it by its proper name. At midnight, Dad finally woke fully. He looked around the hospital room and frowned. "Did Marlene come?" he asked. I lied. Not because she deserved protection, but because he deserved rest. "Not yet," I said. He nodded, accepting disappointment like a man who had learned not to request too much from the world. Then he reached for my hand. His fingers were cold, thin, still strong in that old workingman way. "Danny," he said. He had not called me Danny in years. "I need to tell you something tomorrow." "Not tonight. Tomorrow, when my head is right." I leaned closer. "Tell me now if it matters." He closed his eyes. "It matters." The next morning, Saturday, November 9th, I went home at 6:30 while Dad stayed for observation. The rain had stopped, but the yard looked beaten. Leaves stuck to the walkway. One of Dad's slippers sat near the porch steps, waterlogged and small. I picked it up and stood there with it in my hand like evidence from a crime scene. Inside, the house smelled like wine, perfume, and old candles. Glasses sat on the coffee table. A cheese board had been left uncovered. Marlene was asleep upstairs. I did not wake her. First, I went to my office, opened my laptop, and plugged in the USB drive Mrs. Alvarez had given me. The video was clear enough. At 6:01, Dad stepped onto the porch holding a small trash bag. He had taken out the kitchen trash, something Marlene always complained he forgot. At 6:03, the door opened behind him. Marlene appeared, took the trash bag from his hand, stepped inside, and shut the door. Dad turned confused and knocked. At 6:05, he knocked again. At 6:07, Marlene opened the door just wide enough for her face to show. There was no audio, but I could see her mouth move. Dad gestured toward the rain, toward his chest, toward the door. She pointed down the street, then closed it again. She did not look scared. She looked irritated. At 612, Dad tried the handle. Locked. At 614, he sat on the porch bench. At 619, he stood again and knocked. At 623, he nearly slipped on the wet step. At 629, Mrs. Alvarez came into frame with an umbrella and took him by the arm. I watched it twice. The second time, I did not blink. Then I checked our own doorbell camera. Marlene had turned it off at 5:58 p.m. That mattered. People do not disable cameras before accidents. They disable them before choices. I downloaded the activity log, took screenshots, and sent everything to my attorney, Calvin Briggs. He had handled my business contracts for 15 years. He called back in 11 minutes. "Daniel," he said, "tell me your father is safe first." That is how I knew I still had sane people in my life. I told him Dad was stable. Then I told him everything else. Calvin went quiet for a while. Lawyer quiet is different from ordinary quiet. It has drawers opening inside it. "You still have the house documents?" he asked. "I do," I said. "Good," he answered. "Because she may not remember what she signed 12 years ago. That was the secret at the center of everything. The house Marlene had been acting like she owned was never half hers. When my plumbing business almost folded during the recession, my father saved us. He used his retirement savings to pay off our mortgage. He did not give the money as a gift. He created the Whitaker Family Trust, bought the house through it, and gave Marlene and me the legal right to live there, as long as Dad could safely live with us if he ever needed care. Marlene signed the agreement. She hated paperwork and never read it properly. I remembered every line. The trust said deliberate neglect, abuse, or exclusion of Arthur Whitaker from the home terminated Marlene's right of occupancy immediately upon review by the trustee. I was the trustee. Dad had insisted on that clause. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I realized my father had seen more than I did from the beginning. At 8:15, Marlene came downstairs in a robe, hair, messy face, annoyed before she even saw me. "So are you done punishing me?" she asked. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Dad's wet slipper beside my coffee. She glanced at it, then looked away. That small refusal to look told me she knew exactly what she had done. "How was your dinner?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "Don't start. Did Tessa enjoy herself?" Her eyes sharpened. "What is that supposed to mean?" I opened a folder and placed the trust agreement on the table. Not dramatically. Just carefully, like setting down a blade. "It means we are going to discuss whose house this is." She laughed once. "Our house, Daniel." I tapped the first page. "No. The trust's house." Her face changed, but only slightly. Confusion first. Then memory. Then dismissal. "That old arrangement, your father paid off a loan. We've lived here 12 years. You lived here under conditions," I said. "Last night you broke them." Marlene stared at me. "You cannot be serious." I turned the laptop toward her and played the porch video. She watched herself lock an old man outside in the rain. She did not cry. She did not gasp. She did what guilty people do when shame cannot reach them fast enough. She attacked the angle. "That does not show what happened before," she said. "He was being difficult. He took out the trash. He was hovering around my guests. He lives here. He makes people uncomfortable." I looked at her, then really looked. 20 years of marriage, and somehow I had mistaken polish for character. "No, Marlene. He makes you uncomfortable because he reminds you kindness has a cost." Her face hardened. "I have given enough to your family." "Name it," I said. She blinked. "What name what you gave?" The kitchen went quiet. Outside, a branch tapped the window. She opened her mouth, closed it, and found nothing except anger. That is the trouble with people who keep score in invisible ink. Eventually, someone asks to see the page. Then her phone buzzed. "Tessa." Marlene looked down, then back at me. Suddenly, I understood the timing of the dinner, the women in the living room, the disabled doorbell camera, and the way Marlene had set our life. "You were showing Tessa the suite last night," I said. Her expression betrayed her before her mouth could work. "She needs help," Marlene snapped. "She has nowhere stable." I pointed toward the hallway leading to Dad's room. "So your plan was to make my father look unsafe, push him into assisted living, and move your sister into his room?" She said nothing. That silence was a confession wearing lipstick. I opened the second folder. Calvin had emailed fast. A notice of termination of occupancy pending formal service. a report template for Adult Protective Services, a temporary separation petition, a letter freezing all joint discretionary accounts tied to my business income. I had not slept, but I had been busy. Grief makes some men collapse. Mine picks up a pen. Marlene grabbed the paper and scanned it. Her mouth fell open. You called a lawyer before breakfast. Over one mistake, no, I said. Over one mistake that finally explained the pattern. She stepped back as if I had slapped her. I had not. I would never hit my wife. I had simply stopped cushioning the truth before handing it to her. At 1000, Calvin arrived with a process server named June who looked like she had delivered bad news to worse people and still made lunch on time. Marlene stood in the foyer wearing full makeup, now armor restored. She told Calvin she was being misunderstood. She said Dad had wandered out. She said I was emotional. Calvin listened politely, then asked Mrs. Whitaker why was the doorbell camera disabled 3 minutes before Mr. Whitaker was locked outside. That did it. Not fully, but enough. Her eyes flicked to me. I wanted privacy, she said. For a dinner party, Calvin asked. With an 82-year-old heart patient living in the home, she had no answer. At 1130, I returned to the hospital. Dad was sitting up eating scrambled eggs with the grim determination of a man who believed wasting food was immoral even when it tasted like damp cardboard. He looked better. Smaller maybe, but clearer. He studied my face and said, "You know now." I sat beside him. About the trust clause. He nodded. About that. About her. I looked at my father, this old mailman with bruised hands and rain still somewhere in his bones, and felt a strange mix of sorrow and respect. "Why didn't you tell me you were worried?" He gave a tired smile. Sons do not like hearing their fathers are afraid. That sentence nearly undid me. I reached for his hand. "You should have told me." "I tried once," he said. "You said Marlene was under stress." There it was. Not accusation. Worse. Accuracy. I had defended the person hurting him because admitting it would have required me to rearrange my life. My father had paid for my comfort with silence. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded once. "Not forgiving too fast, not punishing me either." "I know." Then he reached into the drawer beside the hospital bed and pulled out a folded envelope. His handwriting was on the front. "For Danny when I stopped being convenient." My throat closed before I opened it. Inside was a letter dated 6 months earlier. Dad had written that he loved me, that he was grateful, that he did not want to be the reason my marriage suffered. Then he wrote 3 lines I will never forget. "A home where an old man is tolerated is not a home. Do not mistake peace for kindness. If I disappear inside your house, come find me." I had to look away. There are kinds of shame that do not burn. They hollow. Dad put his hand on my arm. "You found me," he said. "Late," I answered. He squeezed once. But before the rain finished, old men can be merciful in ways that make younger men feel smaller. That afternoon, Adult Protective Services took my statement. Mrs. Alvarez gave hers. The hospital documented Dad's condition. I did not exaggerate. I did not need to. Truth had enough muscle. By evening, Marlene had packed 3 suitcases and gone to Tessa's friend's condo, furious that the world had failed to understand her side. Her side arrived by text at 7:42 p.m. "You are throwing away 20 years because your father stood outside for a few minutes." I stared at the message for a long time. A few minutes. That was how she measured another human being's fear. Not by the cold. Not by the danger. By how inconvenient the evidence looked on paper. I replied with 1 sentence. "He stood outside long enough for me to finally see inside." Then I blocked her number for the night. Not forever. I was not hiding. I just wanted one quiet evening with my father, where nobody used guilt as a crowbar. Dad and I watched an old Braves game in his hospital room. He fell asleep in the 6th inning. 3 days later, Marlene's attorney tried to argue that the trust clause was unreasonable. Calvin responded with the video, the camera log, the hospital report, and Marlene's own text saying he's not my problem. People should be careful with cruel sentences. They feel powerful when spoken. Later, they look very different printed in 12-point font under a lawyer's letterhead. Marlene called my brothers next. That failed spectacularly. My older brother Peter had never liked her and had waited 20 years for a socially acceptable reason to say so. My younger brother Eli cried when he saw the video. Not loud crying. Quiet, furious crying. By sunset, both were at the hospital with Dad pretending they had come only for coffee. Tessa posted something online about toxic in-laws and men who cannot leave their parents. It stayed up for 40 minutes before Marlene made her remove it. Not because it was wrong, because Calvin screenshotted it. One useful thing about selfish people is that they often narrate their own motives if given a glowing rectangle and an audience. A week later, Dad came home. Not to the same home, though the walls were the same. His suite had fresh paint not because Marlene demanded it, but because he chose the color himself, pale blue like my mother's Sunday dress. We installed a better heater, a fall sensor, and a chair by the window where he could watch cardinals pick at the feeder. Mrs. Alvarez came over with soup. Peter brought a ridiculous recliner that Dad pretended to hate and then refused to leave. Eli fixed the porch light. I put a new lock on Dad's suite door, one he controlled from the inside. When I handed him the key, he turned it over in his palm like it weighed more than metal. Marlene came by with her attorney 2 weeks later to collect remaining belongings. Dad was in the living room when she entered. She looked at him, then away. No apology. Not even a polished one. That confirmed what I already knew. Some people are sorry for consequences, not harm. There is a valley between those two things, and Marlene lived there comfortably. She told me quietly near the stairs, "You will regret choosing him." I looked toward my father, who was folding a blanket over his knees with careful dignity. Then, I looked back at the woman who had mistaken my patience for weakness. "No," I said. "I regret making him wait for me to choose correctly." The divorce took months because endings love paperwork. Marlene received what the law required and not one spoonful more from the trust. Tessa found another couch to land on. The guest suite stayed Dad's. The house stayed protected. My business stayed mine. My conscience, though bruised, began the long work of standing upright again. Dad lived another 3 years after that night. Good years, not perfect ones. He had bad days, stubborn days, days when his knees hated him and his memory misplaced names. But he had breakfast on the porch, when weather allowed. He had poker nights with my brothers. He had Mrs. Alvarez fussing over his sodium like a tiny general. One spring afternoon, he told me he had been scared that rain would be his last memory of our home. Then he smiled and said, "But now I mostly remember you coming through Mrs. Alvarez's door looking mad enough to fight thunder." I laughed because he did. Then I went to the kitchen and cried where he could not see me. When he passed, he did it in his blue room under my mother's quilt, with all 3 sons nearby and an old Western playing too low for anyone to follow. He was not outside. He was not cold. He was not treated like a problem. His hand was in mine, and when his breathing slowed, I told him the truth. "You were never a burden," I said. "You were the reason I knew how to be a man." I do not know if he heard me. I choose to believe some words know where to go even when ears get tired. After the funeral, I sat on the porch in his old chair and listened to rain begin softly on the roof. People have asked if I was too harsh on Marlene. They say marriage is complicated. They say caregiving creates stress. They say everyone has a breaking point. I agree with all of that. But stress does not turn a lock by itself. Complication does not disable a camera. A breaking point does not say, "He's not my problem," while an old man stands in the rain. That night taught me something I should have known earlier. Family is not proven by who smiles in photographs. It is proven by who opens the door when someone vulnerable is knocking. My father opened every door he could for me my whole life. The least I could do was close one behind the person who left him outside. So yes, my wife locked my 82-year-old father outside in the rain. She thought he had no power, no place, no claim strong enough to matter. The next morning she learned the truth. The house was his. The trust was ready. The cameras remembered. And the son she thought she could shame into silence had finally found the right door to lock.